Hello everyone and welcome back to our blockout. So this is going to be part 3 of the blockout, and before we went back into Maya, what I wanted to do is just sort of slap what we have so far into ZBrush and just do a really quick polish just using these sliders we set up before. And I know this is very basic and a lot of this stuff isn't set up properly, like our smoothing groups are clearly all over the place. But even with just a basic polish, we can definitely start to see that our smoothing is starting to be looking pretty good, and we sort of have these transitions exactly as we want them to be. How everything blends into each other is looking pretty good, and I just sort of wanted to see how it was going to be. Obviously we're going to be changing each of these pieces before we bring them into ZBrush, but it's always cool to sort of get a quick demo of how this kind of looks. So I'm just thinking that we're on the right track right now, so I'm pretty happy with that. Let me just close out of this here, and we can continue along with the stuff that we were working on before. So honestly, now that we have this foundation, I'm starting to feel a lot better about sort of going forward and making the rest of this. I think I explained in the first part of the blockout that this sort of stage, in my opinion, is probably the most difficult, just because it's just trying to wrap your head around everything. But just having this here and knowing that we can sort of base everything off of this shell, and we have some more constraints and more of like a proper footing, I think everything's going to be a lot easier. So let's look back at this. There's a couple things before I dive into this front part that I want to do. The first thing is I've noticed that there are these sort of like blocky pieces here. It might be easier to see in this part where we made this metal bar before. It sort of has a bit of a harder rectangular piece at the top that we can throw in there. It looks like it continues to the other side as well, but it's definitely there. It's visible in all the reference. And then I also wanted to throw in the bell piece as well. So let's go ahead and do that. Both of those should be, pretty quick. So I'm just turning wireframe back on. And just by looking at this one more time, it kind of looks like it's inset just a little bit. Mostly for the beveling that's going to be taking place, but based on the reference, it kind of seems to just be sticking out a little bit before this curve and going right to the end. And it's just a box, so it's going to be really easy to make. I'm just going to hit create, drop in a cube. Let's start messing with this guy. So I'm just going to delete this face and just sort of get him into position. This is like incredibly quick. You already know where I'm going with this. I'm just going to be placing him. What I am going to be doing though is using our little trick where we select a face, shift right click and poke face, just so I can get this guy completely centered. Let's move the pivot and snap it down to the bottom. Snap that guy to the middle here. And I just got one eye on the reference, which is off to the side, but essentially I just want to give it a little bit of room for smoothing, so maybe put it to about here. Move this guy. I'm going to put him to the end. And then it's not like it's standing up super tall or anything. It's pretty much just like that. And that's that. And it's pretty quick. So when we bring this into ZBrush, we're going to want this to sort of have a smooth transition though. So what I am going to do is I'm actually going to make it part of the mesh. I'm hitting Control Delete to get rid of those edges, but what I mean by that is I'm essentially just going to cut a hole in this main part and weld the vertices together. So let's excuse me, let's just move this guy over here so when we do it on the other side, and just quickly cut a hole in. So Control Shift X as always. We can start to cut a very rough hole here. I'm just going to seal that off. Same with this end. I'm going to put a vertex there, and then we can just connect it over on this side. So all I'm going to do is just take this face on the bottom that we just created, delete that, and we can just, holding V, snap the vertice to the bottom. And then when we combine the meshes, we can merge the vertices, and it'll just be one piece. Obviously, there's like a million different ways you can do this. We could have even just extruded from this face that's already there. That's definitely one way to do it. The reason I did this was just to have a bit more control with the box before I committed to anything. This is a weird vertice. I'll just put it there and seal that off. Cool. So let's combine these two with a mesh combine. Go over the vertices, shift right click, we can go to merge our vertices. And yep, that's that. Really quick, really simple. Just got to make sure we do the same thing on the other side. So since it's the same shape and all that, we know if we just do the same process where we poke our face and make sure our pivot is centered and just snap it there, we can just cut out a hole and do the exact same thing over again. So let's delete these edges that are underneath that we just made. Start cutting out a box. Pretty simple stuff. I never really know what to talk about when it's like something this basic, but you guys should definitely know the drill by now as far as using the cut tool goes. I'm just sealing it off so that we have a proper quad, so we don't have to clean it up later. We're doing it right now, so we might as well take care of it. And then just like before, go ahead and merge this guy. Cool. Combine these guys. Shift right click. Whoa. Shift. Interesting. Shift right click merge. I guess Maya just didn't want to do it that time. Okay. Cool. So that's that. We just got this basic shape put into place. And yeah, the bell. So I want to see if I have any, like this is a pretty good reference image of the bell, and we're just like literally doing the block out, so it's not going to be too detailed or anything. But I want to see if we can see what the other side of it looks like. I'm assuming not, just because of like we'd need a shot from the other end looking dead on into it, and then even so there might be things blocking it. So it doesn't look like we have anything. Yeah, we need like this kind of shot, but we need a better view of the other side. It's so dark. So this might be one of those times where I'm like, hey, we have these references. Like, how did this guy go ahead and do it? Because I can stick my camera in here. I'm assuming it's just going to be like a hollowed. Yeah. Pretty much exactly like you'd expect. And for a block out even, like that's more than fine. So let's just get a good reference. Keep it in the corner. This is just mostly for scale. Seems like it comes pretty close to this hanging part, comes pretty close to the side. So this should be a pretty easy one. Just create a polygon primitives sphere. This is just for blockout purposes, so we don't really have to worry about how round it is or anything. Just going to rotate it by holding J so I can snap it precisely. I'm rotating it this way, of course, so I can slice it in half. Make sure I get all these guys. And then what I'm going to want to do is double click this edge to get the whole ring. If we hit shift right click, we can fill the hole. And it seems like we might even want to scale it a little bit. Make this guy a little bit hollow. So I'm just selecting this back face, hit Control E to extrude. We can just switch to our scale tool and scale this in. And then shift drag, so we're just extruding this in once again. I'm just sort of making a really quick hollowed out version. So that's obviously not perfect, but it's definitely more than enough for right now. And we can just sort of get this guy into position. Vertex snap based on the center. We can then even move our pivot to right here so that when we snap it to the front, we know it's pretty flush. And then we're going to want to scale this guy down quite a bit. Just trying to gauge the distance of everything, and this distance seems pretty close. Seems like these are almost touching as well, so maybe even pull this up a little bit. And then if we pull that up, I definitely need to match this. Cool. This definitely looks like it needs to be a bit smaller. But that's that. Cool. So now we can just go ahead and, like I said before, tackle this main front green part. I think once we have this in place, it's going to start to feel a lot more full. It's going to feel a little bit more realized. The thing about this part, though, is I've noticed with each of these, they're all done a little bit differently. Like this one, for example, has all these little dots on it. This guy here has like a nice paint job. I'm definitely more of a fan of this one, just because it has more branding and it's more visually appealing. I like the big screws on the side. And let's just see if there's any other ones. Yeah, like this just looks cool. This is kind of like neither. It's just like a flat, boring one, so we'll try and avoid that. But yeah, it seems like the majority of them have this sort of logoed text style. We definitely have some really good angles, actually. This picture here does a good job of kind of explaining what's going on. So I'm just going to put this off to the side. For this, we're going to be bringing in a new mesh. So let's just create another cube. Scale this guy up. I'm just sort of looking over everything. This is a very nice, well-lit shot, actually. Okay, I'm just trying to get a feel for how it's all broken down. So it's like an overlapping metal. It's coming more forward than the stuff that we've already put into place. This is definitely doing a good job of explaining it, so I'm going to try and mimic that. So let's start by matching the scale. So I'm just dragging these edges and vertex snapping them to these sides here. I've also just noticed these edges. I'm going to go ahead and delete these with the control backspace. Or control delete rather, and they're still not moving. Huh. So in this case, I'm just going to snap them over to these vertices and then just merge them, and they should go away. If you can't delete them, just merge them with something else. Seems like we got that on both sides. Must have missed that in the last part. Interesting. I wonder how that came. Okay, either way, we can keep going. So let's snap this guy forward now, so it's all flush. Going to snap the bottom to this part, so I'm just sort of matching everything. It's interesting to see how far back this goes. If we look at the reference, it kind of seems like it goes a little bit further back than this hollow part. So it goes up, sticks a little bit back, and just sort of like, you can see a little gap there. It seems to go to maybe the bottom of where it's rounded out. So in that case, let's actually raise this up and then snap it to about there for now. So that we can sort of gauge everything else a little bit better. Okay. Let's go back to our main references down here. So it just seems like it goes back. It's a very flat, rounded piece. It doesn't seem to be taking up a ton of space because we seem to have some pretty big shadows coming in from here. This is definitely a good reference for it. So it's coming back, yeah, and it's matching these hollow bits on the side. It's interesting to note that this one has a hole and this one does not. And once again, there's definitely like a subtle overlap, which is good. I think that adds some visual interest for sure. So I'm going to go back to this 3D reference just because I want to double check something. Yep, so this part does go up and go back to sort of match this area, but this part where it curves is definitely a bit thinner. I wasn't sure if this was just sort of like difficult to tell, but it definitely seems that way. Just trying to get some cross reference, and yeah, definitely you can see this square sticking out further than this curve here. Little things like that are pretty important to note. Yep, so just after cross-referencing it, I can confidently say that's the case. This is like a really good example of that. It kind of seems like even half or maybe less of the distance. So I'm going to be going off of this. So this is good the way it is right now. We just have to figure out exactly where we're going to be starting to curve this thing. And actually before that, we can take this a little bit further. So we know that this part here is sticking out a little bit further than the metal frame that we already have. So why don't we go ahead and set that up? So I'm just going to literally extend it out just a tiny bit. It seems like there's only a smidgen of overlap. Maybe like so. But then we also sort of have this cool shape where it comes down and it sort of extends out on the sides. And that seems to happen right above where our triangular keyboard starts to begin. So we can just sort of add in some edge loops. Once again, Control Shift X. I'm just holding Control to get this ring mode. So I'm going to put one here and one here. Let's select the first ring, which I'm going to want to snap to the top of the triangular part. And this one's going to gauge how quickly our change happens. So I don't want it to be too quick, but we can do it about there. And from here, what we can do is take these side faces. I'm going to opt to actually snap them to where this frame begins. I think that kind of just naturally makes sense. And then, of course, we can grab this middle edge loop, drag it up and down to sort of affect how much of a transition we need. About there seems to be fine. And then, of course, that kind of messes up the back. So let's find a way to go ahead and fix that. Interesting. Okay, so there's a lot of things we have to keep in mind here. So this back part is definitely not going to be okay, but at the same time, I don't believe we're actually using any of this geometry back here. I'm going to keep it in for right now. Let me just look over everything once again. Because this definitely seems like it's just wrapped around the top and the front, but obviously it's going to need some kind of thickness. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and delete that back face actually, and the bottom. I'm going to want to add an edge loop to the top. I'm just going to scale it to make sure it's good. And then where do I want this to end? Maybe I don't add an edge loop actually. I just need to delete these side faces. That's probably actually just going to solve most of our problems now that I think about it. We definitely do have this gap, which is going to be an issue. I'm trying to think of the best way. Okay, I think I actually have it figured out. I'm going to delete that top, select these guys. I'm going to shift drag them back and snap it. So we just have this gap. That's kind of the only geometry we have. I'm going to isolate this for a second because I've noticed that everything is inverted. Essentially what's happening here is when the faces are black in the Maya viewport, our normals are inverted, which means everything's kind of flipped. Smoothing isn't going to look properly. Texturing isn't going to kind of appear nearly correct at all. So what I'm going to be doing is I have this button here that reverses my normal. So say I select a good one, I hit that, it'll turn black. If I hit a black one, it'll turn white. But where you can find that is under Mesh Displays and Reverse. And once again, Control-Shift clicking will put it on your toolbar. So if this is something that happens to you often, you might want to go ahead and do that. But let me just make sure that this is all the right way around. Cool. So now we have a little bit of thickness here. And then what we're going to have to do is, and I think this is probably the best way to go about it, is maybe pull this forward even a little bit more. And then I'm going to add an edge loop here to the top. Maybe about this thick or so. And then we can actually drag this out and snap it to here. So that's actually far more accurate to the reference. So we have this sort of like, this part sticking out. I'm actually just gonna go to the renderer, go over to screen space ambient occlusion. Yeah, this is gonna make it a lot easier to explain my point. Okay, so now we have this sort of like chamfered beveled edge sticking out that's overlapping, which is just a much more clear indication that this is a different piece. It's wrapping around the top, it's going back as far as we want. But we know that this is just sort of like a cover. Like we look at this and it's not like one solid chunk, it's just more like an overlapping casing, which we can then cut a big shape out of in the middle. Which is probably what we're going to have to do right about now. So this is a tricky one. I'm going to be honest, this is going to be one of those things where it's like you kind of have to get it right because it's in the center of your model, and not only that, it's kind of determining a lot of how the internal components are working. So for this guy, I'm actually going to be importing a piece of reference. So if we go to PureRef, what we can do is we can select a piece, you can right click it, and you can hit save, export, selected images, and it'll export it wherever you want it to. I've already gone ahead and I've exported this one from previously. So this image here, it's just opening on the other monitor. It's taken a while, okay. Yeah, so this guy is a pretty good, solid, like, front on shot that gives me a pretty good idea as to what exactly I'm cutting out and how far. So I saved that out of my PureRef file, and what I can do is I can put this in the background, I can sort of line everything up and then use a Boolean operation to cut that out. So let's go ahead and do that. Should be pretty straightforward. One thing I'm going to recommend before doing any Booleans, I've said it before, is to always save. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, cool. So to import that image, we can hit our spacebar to get our multi-view up. We're going to be wanting to use this view in the bottom corner, which is our front view. Spacebar to get into that. I seem to have wireframe on. Okay, yeah, so we're looking at it from the back, which isn't perfect. That kind of explains why I have wireframe on. But what we can do from here is go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. We can hunt in our desktop for the image that we've exported out. And here we go. So what I can do here is just very loosely line this up. I'm going to be dragging it out so that I have a better view of the wireframe here. But let's just very, very loosely line this all up. Obviously the perspective is quite a bit different. So we're just gonna have to sort of try our best, unless there's like a better reference, which there doesn't seem to be. You could argue this one, which might actually be a better option. But let's just try this one first and see how it goes. So I'm just trying to make sure that the width is the same on both sides. And with the width lined up, we can line up the top. So we definitely have like a, okay, that seems to be good. Let's go ahead and drop in our cylinder. So let's scale this up. With this guy, we can add maybe a few extra segments since we're only going to be doing half or maybe even less than half. So I'm going to bump this guy up to 36 segments. We can go back to this view and rotate him down. It's definitely getting a bit harder to tell exactly what's going on. But our image definitely seems to be centered and we can sort of work with it just the way that it is. So let's scale this guy a little bit and just try and recreate the shape that we're working with. The reason I know we're on the right track with this is because if we look at this, I know it's very hard to see, but if we look at this line here, we know that this is where our triangular shape starts, and we can see that it's pretty much exactly where it starts in the reference image as well. So we know that as long as this is above that, it gives us this little bit of room here. We seem to be safe as far as that goes. And of course we can always adjust things afterwards. So I'm just trying to loosely get the shape right. A bit wider. Cool. Okay, that definitely seems to be doing it. So we can get that guy in position, make sure he's fully covering everything. And I'm even going to delete this reference image now. So we can select the mesh we're going to be cutting from. I'm going to put wire back on. So this is the mesh we're going to be cutting from. Shift select the mesh we're cutting with. In our Bool manager, we can do a new Boolean operation and cut that out there. Which looks pretty good for the most part. It's making it blatantly clear that this is way too thin, but we can definitely work with that. Delete history and base objects. And now we sort of have our new mesh to work with. So let's just actually select these faces on the back and pull them out a little bit. Like, let's look at our reference and see roughly how thick this is. And it might even be around there. It seems like a little bit less than half, if not exactly half. This is definitely going to cause some issues because if we isolate this guy, we're going to notice that things aren't properly connected. So let's go ahead and snap these verts up. Same with here, I guess. Might as well do some cleanup as we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and merge all of that. I just want to double check that this is all, yep, so that's all one piece. Cool. I do want to straighten this part out though. So what I'm doing is just grabbing the top piece and vertex snapping it over. Because we want the bottom one to stay the way it is. It's doing a nice job of curving everything out. So let's bring everything back. Okay. So this piece goes over, has a bit of like a divot. It seems like it's sort of rounded. It almost kind of seems like where this part comes up and meets it, it bumps over. Might be easier to see it on this side, but this piece comes up and it lumps over and then transitions down. So that should be pretty easy to set up. And I do like the idea of that because it's going to make these beveled edges seem like they're doing a little bit more once we smooth it out in ZBrush. And actually making this is not that difficult. So I'm just going into our cut tool, holding Control. we're getting some weird shapes. So what we can do is select that edge loop, scale it and squish it down, and snap it over. And do the same on the other side, of course. Snap him over. And of course we can just merge all this stuff. And then to get that lump shape, all we really have to do is cut right in the middle. I'm going to delete that. Doesn't seem like we really need it. Same here. And then cut in the middle on the other side. We're just going to raise it a little bit and then bevel it, which is going to take us pretty much all the way there. It definitely seems like a subtle thing based on the reference, so I don't want to go too crazy with it. I'm just going to hit Control B and maybe that. From here we can seal it off. Just going to close these. Oh. Okay, cool. Get this side as well. And the final side. Might even want to raise these a bit. That's pretty easy at this point. Cool, yeah, so now when we like smooth it all out, it's going to go up, have a smooth lump, and then transition down. As I mentioned before, we seem to have a hole here with like a little switch. So I guess we might as well model that in now. I'm not exactly sure what it's doing, but it seems to be doing something. Like I said, I'm no typewriter expert, so I think, yeah, as long as we put it in this part, it should be really, really easy to work with. My only concern is, yeah, if we were to put it in this sort of like lumped part, we'd have to actually model down and close it off, and that's a lot of geometry we're never going to use. And we can't even necessarily bake it down with a ton of good detail. But if we do it here, we can just make it with geometry and give it like a decent amount of geometry and let the bake handle the rest. So since it's only on one side, I'm just checking to see if there's anything else that we're going to have to mirror over later. But it seems like for the most part, this piece is pretty much complete as far as the general shape goes. Which is good. We're going to have to bevel it out a little bit later, but we can do that at the end. I'm just trying to think about something. If we are going to bevel it out, we might want to actually get rid of the edges on this side first, bevel it, and then it's going to work a bit better. So Control Backspace to get rid of that. Let's double click this edge, or I guess since it's an end gone, it's not going to work super well. So let's just manually select these edges here. Just because in all the reference, the transition is pretty smooth. So we might as well get a decent amount of it now. So Control B is going to give us a decent bevel. Put it there, seems fine, just so we can snap right there. And I might even want to snap it down so it's a perfect match. Let's go ahead and do that on both sides. If you ever have these cases where things can just kind of line up, if you move them a little bit, you might as well get it to do so. So that's looking a lot more smooth. We're just going to transition a little bit better into ZBrush when we do that. Once again, let's just close this off. Here to here. Cool. I do want to just hit this with a quick auto smooth. All right. And now we can start working on that cut. So the cut in is actually just seems really like a rounded cylinder with a little knob sticking out, which is really nice. I'm curious to see if we have a 3D model that has that, which we don't. I'm not sure if we have the best reference to see exactly what it is, but it doesn't seem like there's any major mechanism going down from that little cut-in. So we might actually get lucky with how we go about this. You'll understand what I mean in just a minute. Interesting. It doesn't seem like it's very popular in most of these. This one has one. Same here. Huh. Okay. So let's just go back to I'm just going to be looking at this reference. Stick it down here. So yeah, all I'm going to be doing for this is creating a cube. Should be really quick. Going to stretch it out about yay far. And then for this, all we're doing is selecting all the edges around the perimeter, beveling it, turning the segments up a little bit, and we already have our shape to start doing our Boolean with. Might want to scale this in a little bit, merge the verts, but yeah, essentially we just need to poke the face. Whoa. Poke face, there we go. And just snap this guy in the middle, just so we know that it's centered horizontally. I'm going to scale this down a little bit, move it forward, make sure it's poking all the way through. Just looking at the reference, and that seems to be matching. Right, okay. One thing that we do have to be keeping in mind this whole time is as we bevel things, like the smoothness from edge to edge is going to grow in size quite a bit. So I'm giving it a little bit of wiggle room for now. And then if we need to go back, we can always expand it. So let's go ahead, select our main, shift select our bool mesh, new Boolean operation on difference, cuts a hole clean through, and delete history and base objects. So now we have our hole in place. Good, good. We can go ahead and save now. And from here, I just want to kind of see where this ball is more or less connected. Because we don't have a clear understanding of its purpose. If we can't really find exactly where it connects, I might even just sort of have it stick back in here so that you can't really see it, but you can see it from above. So yeah, it definitely doesn't seem like we have a very clear understanding of what it does, but that's okay for right now in the placeholder stage. Let's go ahead and just create a sphere. Just since this one is so much smaller, I'm just gonna drop it down to maybe like 12. We'll be redoing it later anyways. But then selecting these guys and just dragging down, shift dragging, and deleting here. So that pretty much gives us the little button that's sticking out. We're gonna have to scale it a little bit differently, but let's just get that guy in there. And then little buttons like these, or little loose pieces, don't really have to be perfectly centered because they wouldn't normally be anyways. So I'm not too worried about having to do a poke face or anything like that with this guy. Like, I don't think that necessarily matters. But for now, we're just going to leave this here like that. And that's going to do a good job of giving us some representation for when we decide to go back and actually fix that. We also had things like these bolts here, but I feel like we already skipped out on these side bolts here and the bolt connecting the bell. So I think as far as the bolts go, I'll be only adding those in once we're actually doing the version that we're going to be bringing into ZBrush. And just to clarify once again, I know I've been calling this a blockout the entire time, but not only is this a blockout, but this is more or less acting as the majority of our mid poly. We're going to be taking this and building it into our high poly in ZBrush. We're also going to be taking this and turning it into our low poly. So we're doing a lot more than just making a blockout right now, even though at its root, and I know I've been calling it a lot, a blockout, this more or less is a blockout, just with a lot more purpose and a lot more to it. So let's continue. This front piece, it's essentially these keys that is filling it up from here on, but we don't really need to worry about those keys at the moment. That's something that I've decided to save for the end because I feel like the keys are kind of the most dependent on everything else. So I'm going to be saving that. I do want to make this a little bit smaller. So what I've done here is I've selected these faces. And if we hit control right click, we can go to two edges and then two edges again. And it's all the faces we had selected. It selects all the edges on those faces. And the reason I did that is just so I can select some more edges specifically that I'd like to be moving, aka that. And the same on the other side. Right there. Okay. And then we can just sort of move this forward a little bit. I think we were giving it a bit too much space. And then in doing so, I guess we can leave that the way it is. So that front piece is coming along. I think for now I'm going to leave that front piece the way that it is. I'm trying to think of the next part that we could do. We could probably move on to this front ruler. The ruler doesn't seem that difficult, especially now that we have these sort of connection pieces in place. Let's just get some more views of it. Yeah, it definitely just seems more or less like a big rectangle. And then this is like a cylinder with a few what appears to be measuring tools attached to that as well. So we can go ahead and slap that on, and then I feel like once we have that on, we're really starting to get a proper feel for the typewriter that we're making. And once again, I can't stress enough, breaking this down into parts is definitely going to be saving you a ton of time, because now that this this shell is complete, I'm feeling very confident putting everything else together. Like this bar, for example, is literally just a box that I know I have to rest on top of these two pieces. And this is just a cylinder that goes from this screw to this screw. So when working on stuff, if you can, like some things get really complicated, but if you can, breaking it down to its most primal pieces is going to be the difference between confusion and a pretty good understanding of what's going on. So let's go ahead and add that. As I mentioned before, it should just be a pretty quick and easy piece that we're going to be adding in here. like our measurements are already set up as well, so we really don't have too much to worry about. I'm going to be grabbing this and snapping it to this vert at the very end, doing the same over here. What I want to do here now is select this face and snap it to here, and this face, snap it to here. So essentially the width of this matches the width of this perfectly. We can then just sort of take our vertice, or our gizmo, move it to a vertice, snap it down, and then as we rotate it, it will land flush on the bottom. I'm just going to sort of loosely get it into place, and then from here, scale it out further. I'm actually going to be changing our move settings by double clicking on it on the left side to object, and then we can snap it down this way, and then things are a little bit off. So what I'm going to be doing is switching this back to world. We can have this face selected, hit D, move our gizmo to the vertice in the corner and snap it. So now that we know that side's super flush, this side is definitely flush as well. In the reference, this is coming out a little bit further, so we can go ahead and accommodate for that. Let's center our pivot. Might as well freeze transformations and delete history while we're at it. Scale it out just a smidgen more. And then in our scale tool, we're going to want to put this onto... Oh, okay. That's actually a mistake. Let's undo. So we're going to want to keep our transformations on, as well as our history. And the reason we want to do that is this information here that we're deleting by freezing our transformations is what is essentially telling us how this pivot is going to be placed when it's set to object mode. It says, okay, so the object is rotated X amount on whatever axis. That means the gizmo has to match it. As soon as we freeze the transformations, this assumes it's all zeroed out and faces the default world position. So we're going to leave that the way that it is for now, and we're going to scale it down based, once again, on this vert. Just trying to match this reference image here. Which seems to be about yay thick. From here, I can center the pivot. I might even want to thin this out a little bit just to match the reference a little bit more. So I'm going to thin this out. And then from here, extend it a little bit more. So that's definitely a very good example of when you'd want to sort of keep your transformations on. But if something isn't this specific, you might as well delete it. It's going to speed everything up a little bit more. So let's keep that the way that it is. The next part is this like miniature ruler section, which should be pretty easy now that we have this one set up. Let's center the pivot on this. I'm actually going to do a technique I was talking about before, where I'm actually going to, since we already have this angle set up, if we hit Control E on this face, we can just use an offset. I'm going to just eyeball it based on the reference. Put that far. Let's center the pivot. Or sorry, since it's subbed object, if we hit D, we can reset the pivot by clicking off, and then scale this in a little bit. This bolt here, we can see is clearly bolted to the center of this raised piece, so we got to make sure that this ruler part gives it enough space to breathe and work with. Just got to make sure you're observing all the little pieces here. And then from here, we can Control E to extrude, bring the thickness up, not a ton or anything like that. That might even be a bit too much. Let's go for a 0.3, which is great. One thing to note though with this is it does seem like it's a different piece that's been bolted on, so I don't want this to be welding together. And since I don't want it welding together, I need these to be two different meshes. So I'm selecting these faces, shift right click, extract faces. So now they're two different pieces. And let's just isolate this guy on the bottom to clean him up. Let's select this, shift right click, and we can merge edges to center. From here, just select these edges, control backspace, and we're back to just a regular box. The top, what we're gonna have to do for this guy, just select this ring here, shift right click, fill hole. Very simple stuff, but that's pretty much all we have to do for that. That's definitely one of the easier parts, and once again, it sort of gives us some more guidance as to how everything else is going to be laid out. Just looking at this now, I might want to center this pivot and widen it out a little bit. I'm sure I'm going to be pretty finicky with a lot of this stuff as we go. And then I kind of want to scale it down since the extrusion didn't give us as much freedom. But yeah, there we go. So that is that part. Next up we have this. Definitely seems like, well, this is a ruler and this is for keeping some sort of measurement. I'm not entirely sure what you'd be measuring with a typewriter. Probably the index sizes or something along those lines. I'm not totally sure, but we're gonna have to go ahead and set that up. So this is really cool because we already have these bolts here, these guys specifically, and it kind of seems like these bolts are being used as a way to bolt this guy down and keep it in place. So we already know exactly where this is going to be going. We already know the scale of everything. I'm actually going to be taking this bolt here and using our smart mesh tool so we can smart duplicate that face. Let's center the pivot on that guy. So that's a really good base to be working from. I'm going to move the pivot and snap it to one of these vertices here so we can snap it back here. We definitely have an issue with the thickness, but right now I'm just going to be scaling this down. This is definitely more than thick enough for this reference. It kind of seems like it goes from a larger circular piece, which I'm assuming is the bolt on the other side, goes thin, large, thin. So let's try and emulate that as best as we can. So this is going to be starting off thin, which then we extrude out a little bit. We extrude the thickness out a bit. Let's just merge all that. So now we have this piece that starts thin, goes thick. I'm actually going to pull this out a bit. I'm just looking at this reference and you can see this starts thin, goes thick, thin again, but it's out far enough that you can sort of tell from like this angle. So I'm gonna just make sure it's visible. Scale it up maybe even a little bit more. Get rid of that selection. Just so that this stays the same, there's no tapering. Now we can address this issue and scale it up a little bit. All right, let's select these faces. And if you're wondering how I select this, it's I'm selecting one face and pressing Shift period to grow my selection, and then just holding Control and double clicking to sort of get this ring on the outside away. We can hit Control E once again to extrude in with an offset. Maybe like 0.15. definitely seems to be even smaller than that. All right, so let's select these faces on the end. Scale it out. I'm going to hold X to snap it to the grid because that should be our middle point. We could also snap it to right there in the middle. But we have this secondary ring here. The easiest way that I can think of getting that is to select these faces, shift period to grow selection, use our smart duplicate to get a copy of that, and just move it forward about yay far. And then just, of course, modify, what am I saying? Mesh combine. Let's just turn this off. We might even get away with making this whole thing a little bit thicker. Like so. And then since this is halfway, we can put our pivot in the middle, freeze transformations, history, all that stuff, and mirror over the X. So now it goes all the way across. I'm also going to merge those vertices, and then we don't need them at all, so I think it may have been capped. Yeah, so we have faces in the middle, which isn't going to select us, or let us select the inner ring. Cool. Now we can select it, control backspace, get rid of all that. Let's quickly hit this boy with an auto smooth. Looking much better. We got these little parts here. Very weird looking near the bottom. Not totally sure what's going on. But it should be simple enough to figure out. And then that will probably do it for this part once we have that set up. So let's go ahead. It should be rather easy because we really only have to make one and then duplicate it over. Of course, things like bolts and stuff like that are really easy to see repeated. But in this like blockout stage, mid-poly stage, we don't have to worry about that. It's not until we sort of bring it into ZBrush and deal with it then that we're going to really have to sort of be conscious about rotating everything and making sure that they're facing different ways. So for now, let's just work on making one of those. And actually, let's go ahead and save first. All right, so let's make them. They actually do seem like they're a little bit different. This one seems very vertically larger, and this one seems horizontally larger. But regardless, the main part, the main front piece is going to be staying the same. So once we have one set up, making the other one is going to be quite a bit easier. So I'm even looking at this 3D model that I found online, and it definitely seems that's also the case. One of them being a lot wider horizontally. So let's start with the one that's wider horizontally. Let's hit create, polygon primitives, cube. And we can even isolate this guy, or both of them. Let's go ahead and just poke this back face. We're going to be deleting it later anyways, so we might as well get a little bit of use out of it now, so we can just sort of snap everything. So we know that this is positioned perfectly on the rod. I should definitely get this reference in here so that it's a lot easier for you guys to understand what I'm talking about. But I'm hoping as you're watching this that you have this reference open anyways and you're sort of following along, looking at the reference that I've provided. But this definitely seems more or less like the shape. Scale it in a little bit. And then it seems like a key part of this is that the top two have a pretty solid bevel. Let's do a 0.25 right in the middle. And then the bottom ones are also beveled, but they don't seem like they're nearly as beveled. Let's do like a 0.15. Then I might even want to skinny it up a little bit this way. And then blow him up in size this way. Seems like I kind of got him off center a little bit. Let's snap him accordingly, or maybe it's just in my head. Uniform scale. Yeah, that seems mostly right. Let's even make it a little bit bigger. Always got to make sure you zoom out so you know the relative scale to everything else. It also kind of makes me feel like I should lower this as a whole. Which means I need to lower these guys later on. So let's lower this a little bit. Let's go ahead, selecting these guys. We can actually get it exact by snapping it to the vertice all the way in the middle on this ring. And does that look weird? Nope, seems to be working just fine. Cool. So back to the actual shape of this. Kind of just looks like a box that's wrapped up and resting on the ruler at the top. Should be pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and make another box. You guys should know the drill by now. To get it in the center, we can just poke face, snap him in the middle, go ahead and delete that. It doesn't look like we're gonna need this back face. Let's go ahead and delete that. Scale him down. You can even move his pivot to the end, so when we snap it, it's perfectly placed. Scale him in quite a bit more. It's always one of those weird shapes where it's like you can't really bake that down, but it's so thin you don't want to give a geometry. So that'll be an interesting one when we're making the low poly. Okay, let's give it a subdivide in the middle. Kind of want to make it a bit wider first. Yep. And then we can bevel this so that we get two evenly placed ones from the center. Maybe 0.4. And then we can just start extruding. So I'm going to start by extruding this straight up and then a little curved. No, start just straight up so it's not clipping or anything into the piece behind it. Then extrude again where it's back quite a bit. Start to rotate it. And then one final, maybe not a final extrusion, one more that's going to get it mostly there. And then one final one. Let's start to play with these guys a little bit. Just trying to match the, where it kind of looks like it's struggling to bend into place. Kind of like this, but maybe not even as far up. Does that seem too big? No, that seems about right. If anything, this part's just a bit too wide. Kind of makes me want to take this and scale it up this way so that I can take this bottom part and do the same. Oh god, I didn't select it all. Scale it up, scale it over. And then snap this back. I suppose we could leave it, because we're gonna have to bevel it later anyways, but just for consistency's sake. And then we have a little bit of an arrowhead at the top. So the way that I want to get that is by selecting these two, dragging out the thickness on them a little bit, and then simply taking the top and snapping them back. We can then merge all those. And then it doesn't seem like it's coming to a super fine point, so I'm just simply going to take the top and scale it in like so. I do think that the bend definitely seems much more like that, where it's like straight and then like someone like physically pressed it into place with a bend. So we can work with that. I do kind of want to put the bolts on this one because it's such a small piece and the bolts seem to be such a major aspect of it. So all I'm going to be doing is we're going to be using this tool here just to save a little bit of time. Like I said, you don't have to use this. It's just for me to save some time. Because I can click and put a bolt on immediately. You guys should know the drill by now. If you wanted to bring in a cylinder manually, you could just poke face and put it in that way. So I'll show you exactly that right now. Let me just scale this up so you can shift right click poke face, and then I'm just gonna duplicate this guy over and snap. It's just a much quicker way for me to just get basic geometry into the scene and then mesh combine to get all those together. As for these pieces at the bottom here, it's kind of difficult for me to tell exactly what they are. Like I'm looking at this 3D interpretation and it kind of seems cool how this guy did it. He sort of has this interesting shape surrounding some kind of like nub or bolt. You can see it a lot better here. So let's look at this one and copy it off of this way. I like how this kind of shows off what it is. Is there like a piece of metal extending from the bottom though? Interesting. It's kind of hard to tell. I'm gonna have to assume that there is for this. By putting an edge loop in the middle, Control B to bevel it. It kind of seems like it's being attached to like a little piece of metal at the bottom. So that's what I'm going to be going with for this. Should definitely thin this out a little bit. It doesn't seem like it's that noticeable. Going to be using that tool I was just using before to get another quick cylinder in, just so I know that it's perfectly placed. I'm going to go ahead and delete the back on that guy. Move the pivot. Snap it in. Yeah, and it seems like it's sticking out decently far. So let's get it out about yay far. And then we're definitely going to have to round it out. So let's bevel this guy. Bring it out a little bit further. And then we just sort of need this piece of metal wrapping around it. I'm trying to think of the best way to do that. honestly, I think for now, because we're gonna look into it a lot more when we're doing the proper version. For now, we're just gonna get a really basic, we're gonna get a really basic cube. And just sort of make it look like it's just a piece of metal covering it, because that's kind of all I can see it doing. I'm not entirely sure the purpose of that. So let's try our best to make it with our limited understanding of typewriter functionality here. So the way that I'm interpreting it is kind of like a piece of metal, and then I'm going to extrude this up. That's kind of covering it like so. And then I want to round it out. So a way that I can round it out is, instead of having the extrude have edges come out like this, I can just sort of have these edges connected. And that way, when I select this edge loop and I bevel it, it's just a much cleaner, rounder shape. This reference is also like way thinner, so I don't know why I'm making mine so big. So I know this is kind of a pretty crude recreation, but we'll revisit it when we're doing a proper version. I'm going to get that a bit closer so that I can scale this way down. And that should be that piece. I want to make this as non-discrete as possible, so raise that up. I'm even tempted to just like put a cut here and just totally delete the back. Like, I'm not entirely sure what it's doing, so I don't want it to take up too much space. Fill a hole there, something like that. I could even push it back maybe, but that should do it. And then now making the secondary one should be pretty easy. Since we already have 90% of the parts in place, we just got to make this thinner one. It kind of seems like it's beveled up at the back. Regardless, should be really easy to make. So let's create Polygon Primitives cube. Bring this guy in. Let's do what we did before, where we just sort of have these two on their own so that we can center everything. So again, just holding V to snap. Snapping is definitely your best friend when you're trying to make anything precise. Yeah, so this one's definitely following much more like a this kind of shape. It also sort of has that bottom piece as well. So let's combine these two actually. Control D to duplicate. I'm bringing this guy over so I have an indicator as to how low to make this. Let's go ahead and poke face. Go that way. Delete that. It kind of seems like we have this this line of space. So I'm going to add a line here, which we can then cut from later on. This is definitely too much, so I'm just bringing it all up. We'll give these guys a bit more attention before we bring them into ZBrush properly. And then it just seems to be a little bit lower at the front, or at the top rather, and then at the back, just getting higher up. give it a small bevel. Maybe not, it just makes it way harder to work with. So let's leave it like that. I'm starting to think maybe these are... Yeah, this one's definitely a bit thinner than this one, the actual front plate. But regardless, this is definitely too wide now that I'm looking at it properly. So let's take these two, scale them in. But we can still use pretty much all of this. Control D, bring it over. Poke face. As long as our pivot's centered, this should snap pretty good into there. Yeah, let's scale these in a little bit more. These will make sure they're the proper size when we're doing it, but then we can definitely afford to widen that out a little bit. I'm tempted to raise that up a bit more, as well as this. Okay. I'm going to save, so just make sure you go do that. But that's going to do it for this part. I think we're definitely heading in the right direction. It's really nice to sort of see this as more than just a shell. We're starting to get a little bit of the parts on the side. This quick addition does definitely add a little bit of shape and function to it. The front obviously is starting to fill it in a lot more. And it's definitely getting there. Yeah, once we have the keys in place, once we sort of get this centerpiece in, it's going to be looking a lot better. I think for the next part, we'll tackle the pieces on the top here, and then inevitably we're going to start to have to tackle the guts on the inside and the front keyboard. It's definitely these little parts that are starting to make me be like, how exactly are we going to do that? But we'll definitely figure out a way. Obviously, like getting these little pieces to actually, for each key, go under, wrap around, and be the same for the individual, because we're going to put the symbols on each of these metal pieces. To have these be the exact same mesh as these ones might be overcomplicated. We might find a way to actually sort of have these bottom metal pieces cut off at some point, and then have these be totally separate geometry where we fake it. I'm thinking that might be the easiest way to do it, because if we actually have this metal piece from this key go down, wrap up, curve around, and have them curve perfectly, that might just be a little bit too tricky to get perfectly right. It's definitely doable, but it's definitely not the most optimal way. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of thinking to see how we do that before we tackle that. But regardless, that's the end of this part. We're doing pretty good, and I will check out exactly how to do the top part next time. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.